I'm Jonathan Horn.
I'm Cody Atkinson.
And I'm Matteo Schlapik-Savillo, and this is the 110 Percenters podcast. Hello, and welcome to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. My name is Matteo Schlapik-Savillo. I write the 1 Percenters newsletter. I'm joined, as I am every week, by Cody Atkinson of the ABC. Cody, how are you?
Good this morning, Matteo. Very good. And I've just realised we're recording in the afternoon.
We
That's
are recording
how well
in the
I'm
afternoon.
going.
Yes. Cody, please tell the listeners about the fact that just over your back shoulder, you've apparently got archers firing.
Yeah. From my bedroom window, I had to pay extra for this feature. I get to watch people practice the ancient art form of archery. They're shooting from about 30 meters right now, and they're pretty accurate. Oh no! Hang on, they can hear me. They're turning at me, guys. I just need to duck for a second, guys. You cover me. Yeah, you got it.
And that was the last we ever heard of Cody. Thankfully, I'm also joined by Jonathan Horn of The Guardian. Jonathan, how are you, mate?
Hello, gentlemen. I live in one of Melbourne's hipster enclaves, and we don't have archers here, Cody. We can't compete with that. We've got a lot of sort of 1800s mustaches and whatnot, but no archers.
Well, axe throwing. I think axe throwing is the inner
It
Melbourne
is.
kind of leisure du jour. It's pretty fun. I don't know if you've actually ever done it, Jonathan. It's pretty good.
I wouldn't trust myself with a few drinks under the belt and throw in an axe, especially in like a corporate type environment where there might be sort of a boss employee type sort of tension. With an axe in my hand, I could run foul of certain people.
Also, and I don't know if this survived COVID, but not too far from where we are today, Jonathan. Not that we're in the same place in Melbourne, but pretty close to us. There was one of those spots where you could go and basically take a baseball bat and smash up like sort of
Yeah, the stress
crockery.
release moves.
Yeah, crockery and smash up old
You don't need to
printers
tell
and
Jonathan he's got
photocopiers.
like a season membership.
No,
He's got.
it's funny. It's funny because I referenced that for some reason in a piece I did recently on Patrick Cripps because I remember we for some job I was doing, one of the activities was just go to one of those things where you just beat the crap out of like old bits of furniture and things and
Yep.
like and the people come out at the end. It's like a Zen experience.
Well, surely it's an entire business idea inspired by that one scene from that film Office Space, right? Where they smash up the old Xerox machine or something. I have done it once and it was fun.
Yeah.
Did you guys feel zen? It sounds like both of you guys have done it. Did you guys feel zen after it?
I wish I've done
I
it.
I need one installed in our house because as a Crows fan, I need regular access to it. But I did feel pretty zen after I got done. My favorite bit was um, toward the end, they let you request a song and you went into a little enclosed room and it was just, yeah, it was kind of frenzied, but it was a good way to vent steam from memory.
Someone's
Uh,
making money out of this. We're in the wrong game.
The op shops, yeah.
if anyone I believe it's called the Break Room. If anyone from the Break Room is listening and is interested in sponsoring 110% of the podcast, please get in touch. This season has, I would say, vindicated the concept that time seems to pass faster the older you get because it was round 21. And round 21 began with Geelong and Freo grinding out wins over Collingwood and the Dogs on Friday night. On Saturday, Sydney ran over the top of St Kilda and that fascinating last quarter with that stoppage for that horrible injury for Will Edwards, the emerging Sydney defender. Hawthorn outlasted a stubborn North Melbourne in Tassie. The Giants eked out a 2-goal win over Port Adelaide, the ethically tanking Port Adelaide, and in a result that we all expected on Saturday night, Carlton smashed Brisbane by 76 points. It was Carlton's highest score for 14 years, and it was the second time that the back-to-back premiers have lost by more than 70 points to a bottom 9 team this season. It's curious stuff. Saturday should be said also saw Australia run out big winners eventually in a really, really exciting inaugural international AFLW game against Ireland at North Sydney Oval, and we will talk about that game later on. On Sunday, Melbourne came back to beat Gold Coast, cementing their spot in the top 6, while condemning Damien Hardwick's side to a 10th straight defeat. It's been a very, very successful death ride of Gold Coast for Melbourne supporters this season. In the late game, Adelaide beat Essendon by 12 goals in a game that, if it's remembered at all, will be remembered for the fact that 3 Crows players kicked their first goals. But we begin this week's show at a sun-soaked MCG, where on Sunday afternoon, Richmond defeated a wayward West Coast in a bit of a battle of the basement. Our roving correspondent, Jonathan Horn, was there. Jonathan, it's been a challenging season for both sides, but I think there were lots of green shoots on display in this game. What were your impressions of it, starting maybe with Richmond?
Well, it's funny because this is the first game we've ever taken our daughter to. So she's
Yeah,
3.5, and it ended up being her first ever footy game. It was a good time slot, good weather. It was the right crowd to take a 3-year-old to, I think, like
yep.
not too big, but just enough. And plus, her mum's side of the family are all West Coast. So to be perfectly honest, she wasn't very impressed by what was going on. I was on the other side of the ground in the press box, and I've got these new binoculars, and I was trying to pinpoint her in the crowd because the game was pretty grim at stages, and every time I sort of was able to find her in the crowd, she's just munching away on her chips, and she thinks like every time someone applauds that the game is then over and she can go home. So it was a bit weird. So she lasted until half time. But I digress. I guess what I'm getting at is that it was a pretty grim watch for some of it, and with a great finish. And it's sort of, I've been interested in this Richmond rebuild all the way since that draft of 24,
Hmm.
when there was so much hype and so much hope invested in that draft. And you think that you sit there watching it, it's almost like on a night like that, you sit there and watch it and think, well, how could any of this go wrong? How could they actually get any of this wrong? It's a bit like when Monty Burns in The Simpsons assembled that baseball team, sorry, that
Yeah,
softball
yeah,
team, and he's got, well, what could go wrong? Well, one injury, yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
he's got,
two.
yeah.
But of all of them going down, yeah, I'd like to see that. But for Richmond this year, like they all have gone down pretty much. So I think that's why this one did mean a lot, I think. And I think the fact that it was Lawler, who we haven't really got to have a proper look at, certainly this year. The fact that but he was the class player out there because there's quite a bit of ineptitude in that game. It was
Sure.
obviously windy, and it was obviously, but the fact that he was able to just put that stamp of class on it, I think it just gives Richmond as a club, as a supporter base, as a team, it just gives them that, as Ross Lyon would say, that little bit of nourishment, that little bit of hope that they really haven't had this year. It's been a really grim year for Richmond. They got that nourishment last year, in so many ways, but this year it's just been a slog. It's been a long, long winter for Richmond, and it felt like the sun came out on Sunday, and it just felt like something different. A really, really quality footballer in the end, pretty much winning the game for him.
Cody?
yeah. It's fascinating that you say sort of we haven't seen much of Layla and what could possibly go wrong. They've used 40 guys this year.
Hmm.
More importantly, they've had almost no one of that young ilk available. Only one Tiger has played all 20 games this year. Does anyone want to guess who the lucky man is?
He's one of those tall defenders, is it?
Is it, yeah, Miller,
Yeah.
maybe?
Seth Campbell is the
Oh, there
only
you go.
Tiger to
Yeah,
play
Yeah,
every
right. Oh,
game
yeah,
this
he's a
year.
beauty. He's a beauty, Seth Campbell.
He's great, but beyond that, you've got Vlosten and Broad has missed one game, and that's it. Everyone else has missed more than that. They've been West Coast, for example, have also used 40 players, but they've had 6 play all 20 games and another 4 play 19. So we're talking about a side who's probably been more interrupted than any other side. Maybe GWS has a complaint there. I think this is nearly annual horribus. Is that the term? Like it's the
Yeah,
year from hell.
Annus Horribilis or something, right? Yeah,
There we go.
exactly.
Yeah, the
Well,
archers
because
are having a go at me for butchering Latin too.
yeah, for mangling the Latin, exactly.
Um,
Uh,
here you go.
yeah, I think that Yeah, because you want that nourishment, right? You want, and I think Sunday provided that. It ended up being a game where young Tigers fans and even older Tigers fans, you don't have to remember the dynasty era, I guess, to have really gotten a lot out of Sunday's game. The fact that Lawler was so instrumental, even something as fleeting and ephemeral as Taj Hotton's rundown and winning that holding the ball free kick against Harley Reid on the wing, that's the kind of thing that Tigers fans will remember, because you've really got to stick with it through the long winter, and that's what this is, and this combination of, well, I think all realistic Tigers fans knew that the team would be bad again this year. There was really no other outcome, but when it's combined with so many games missed by this talented crop, we talk about Lawler. Look, I don't know if this counts as a hot take, because I do feel like so much of the 2024 draft discourse, it's been dominated by Jagger Smith and it's been dominated by Murphy Reid. But so yes, I'm not sure if this does count as a hot take. I'm reasonably confident that when Sam Lawler strings footy, a really good amount of footy together, he'll separate himself from the rest of the 2024 pack. I think he's really, really impressive, and I think you could see the traits that made him, in the end, I think for Richmond, a fairly clear choice at number one in 2024. I reckon you could see them from his first game. So whenever he's out there, he does something impressive. He just hasn't been able to get out there enough.
What sort of I'm kind of really interested in him, just watching him as a player right
Yeah.
from the time he started. I'm trying to work out what he's going to become, not in terms of like his level and things like that, but just what sort of footballer, what his role
Positionally,
is going to be. And
yeah,
I don't, because people make that comparison to Dusty because he kind of looks like him with the shaved head and he's got the number 4 and he's got the fend off, but he is different.
yeah,
And it's a bit of an easy thing to go to, and I'm trying to sort of project with him and kind of work out what he's going to be in 5 years' time. Is he going to be like this goal kicking 50 goals a year forward, or is he going to be a permanent on baller? Is he an explosive player? I'm not sure he's that. All I know is he had about just 4 or 5 moments on Sunday where you just look at him and you think, and this is what Uze always says. He always says, "Oh, so and so's got the football chip," and he's got that. He's just got one of those young footballers. You look at it and you think, this guy's got it, and we might not see the best of it for a couple of years, but this guy's going to be something. And I think he's got that. I just can't quite figure out exactly what kind of player he's going to be.
And,
yeah.
and I,
I agree. I was going to say the same, and I think there's that hope that the number one pick will be that dominant inside midfielder or the ball winner that can break free of packs. Bailey Humphrey wasn't a number one pick, but he's very Dusty-like, right, in ways. But Laylor never really played in the middle as a junior at the top level. He had 4 clearances in his top age 18 year. Like, he was projected more as that sort of Cam Rayner, nearly. Like, is probably a better comparison there.
well, he didn't
And
even fully commit. Sorry, Con, he didn't even fully commit to footy until I think it was the end of maybe his underage year. So to an extent, recruiters were working off a really small sample size across all facets of his game, really.
yeah, and I think expecting him to be that inside midfielder, it's what he was drafted end of 2024, where mid 2026, towards the end of 2026, even if you project out that it's a Petrarca-like delayed entry to that midfield group through the forward line, he probably hasn't had enough time in that role at any level, let alone those injury breaks, to show that. That being said, sometimes, and I know we've talked about highlights versus watching the game in depth before, his highlights give you enough hope that he will find a place on the football field. The problem for Richmond is the pieces that they're going to have to put around it. And I think that's why this year was nearly designed, despite injuries, for them to have maybe a less than successful one. Because this is going to be the last uncompromised draft. And this is the time for the West Coast, the Richmonds, to load up before Tasmania starts to take the spoils and trade out.
I wrote a piece. It would have been maybe just before the buy started. So I guess in that maybe sort of middle third of the season. Because I was so interested by just this huge groundswell, it seemed, of negativity toward the Richmond rebuild, and to an extent, you're talking about a slightly distorted sample, right? Really sort of extroverted and unhappy Richmond fans online who had it in for Uze, and they obviously had it in for their strength and conditioning team. And I guess there's a bit of a bloodlust that maybe creeps in when you're a couple of years into a rebuild and it's dark days, and you probably just want a head to roll of some kind because you sort of just are eager for something to happen. But I found myself being really interested in that, so I dug into it, and I was able to speak to someone who has a connection with the Tigers, with the footy club, and his sense was basically the frustration is that, yeah, it was a year where the side was always going to be bad. The problem is there are just all of these minutes that these kids haven't had a chance to play. And he spoke a lot about Taj Houghton. He spoke also about Josh Smiley as well, who we obviously still haven't seen at AFL level, and that big-bodied midfielder archetype, one of those bigger puzzle pieces you would think that the Tigers would be really eager to see how they fit around a Lawler type, because Smiley could be the sort of guy who eats, dozens of centre bounce attendances every single game, right? It just becomes a plug and play type midfielder. We haven't seen that. I think Tigers fans should probably be reasonably, quite pleased probably with the output so far of the ground level draftees that they've taken. I think that Sam Cumming, one of the 2025 crop, has shown quite a lot. I quite like Sam Grill as well. He's more of a sort of halfback now. But yeah, Houghton and Lawler are fabulous. I think the question marks are probably at this stage more on the talls.
Yeah.
Maybe, and there's so much there's always draft FOMO, right? There are Richmond fans who lament that they didn't take Murphy Reid, and then there are Richmond fans who lament that they didn't take someone like Job Shanahan, for example, and they see what he's producing at West Coast, and they compare his output or his highlights at least to someone like Jonty Fall or Armstrong, perhaps. But I just think inevitably with Tools, it's especially when they have so little support up in the forward line with Richmond, especially with Tom Lynch not having played much. It's just so hard to really draw any sort of conclusions about these kids.
And it's hard to draw any conclusion about the way they're being coached too because of
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And it's almost, I still feel like in the grand scheme of things that they're going to be okay and it's tracking okay. I do feel like in the grand scheme that they probably have lost a year in the grand scheme of it. And I think when we look back, they'll say, geez, we were probably a year behind the eight ball now because of that
sure.
2026 that they've had. And it means, I guess, when you have that many injuries and sort of really frustrating injuries too, these are soft tissues. These are, I mean, Smiley just went down kicking a ball at training, I think, and has sort of hasn't been seen since. You kind of start second guessing a lot of other things then. Suddenly you start second guessing the coach. You obviously start second guessing the high performance team, and they got rid of their high performance, the guy running that, which is probably a good decision in the end. And also you start second guessing. You start looking, like you said before, you start looking at what's happening at other teams, and you look at Murphy Reid, and you start, if you're a Richmond person, you're thinking, oh my God, how did we let this guy get through? Like every kid that we have drafted in that 2024 draft has come from the same school competition, basically, and Murphy Reid was in that competition, and yet we somehow bypassed him. So you start to kind of you get those doubts, and I just think that that's why a win like Sunday is important for everyone because it just calms everyone down a bit, and it just
Hope
thinks.
matters a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it's just sort of, okay, as long as Lawler's out there, we're going to be okay. And these other kids, they'll get 5 months over summer to get themselves right, and we can start again. And I
Yeah.
think if they had lost that game, which they probably should have, let's face it, West Coast just pissed that game away.
Oh, Jonathan,
Yeah.
I'm sure your daughter was lamenting Jake Waterman's
She was,
Jake Waterman's goal kicking and the fact that West Coast were underperforming their X score by so much.
it was pretty bad. And I've heard a lot about, the wind and things like that. The wind wasn't that bad that day. Like it was pretty normal for a winter's game. So look, yeah, sometimes you've just got to win in rebuilds. And I've heard that said about North Melbourne recently. There's just some games, forget about learnings and all that nonsense, just freaking win the thing. And I think
The
Richmond did that, and it was
yeah,
really important to do so.
yeah. No, sorry, Cody. It's your turn to speak.
No, we don't have turns. Like, okay, everyone, we do throw around the
Archers have
ball.
turns.
We do have our talking stick here at on the 110 percenters. I was just going to say, there's a few lessons that Sam Doherty in our podcast last episode, and if you haven't listened to that yet, do go and make some time because it's fascinating to hear a former AFL captain talk about his journey and what actually goes on inside a football club. But he talked about his early days, how much he learnt in the NEAFL. Of course, there's no NEAFL anymore, there's the VFL, and how much he learned his craft and what he was meant to do at AFL level. Would you say that there's, I guess, some sense that these kids aren't getting that apprenticeship? They're not getting that ability to learn and train, and they're getting thrown at the deep end, often in unfamiliar roles against overmatched opponents, and then we're expecting them to perform to a higher level. It's a bit unfair, isn't it?
It's sort of the $1 million developmental question, isn't it? Because the real scorched earth, blow it all up, rebuild, when they get stuck, it's because the first, 5 years often of the careers, the AFL lives of these draftees are often wasted, is perhaps too strong a word, but they're spent in such suboptimal environments with so few senior players that they can learn from. And that was always the danger, I think, with the way that Richmond approached, particularly that 2024 draft. They did cut deep. They had a lot to cut, so to speak, because there was such an experienced premiership core. And even though they let a few of them go, like Shea Bolton, obviously, to Freo, they still had a lot of good and experienced players who remembered what it was like to have success. But I think if you look at rebuilds like North Melbourne's, that's been tough because when you're sort of stacking a rebuild on top of another rebuild that never really quite succeeded, that never really took root, you begin bumping into really difficult age curves and demographic curves, and you sort of have players who are notionally senior figures at a club, often never really had that mentorship and were never able to serve that successful kind of apprenticeship at AFL level. And I'm going to kind of bring forward what I was going to say in response to what Jonathan just said about the kind of emotional trajectory of rebuilds. The main rebuild that I've experienced as an Adelaide supporter is that, I guess, 2020 to, I guess you'd call it 2023 rebuild. And that one was quite different to the Richmond and West Coast ones, the journey that those two sides are on. Because Adelaide became competitive pretty quickly. And I think that's actually a great credit to Nix and the system that he was able to implement. And I think it suggests quite a lot about the older players who stayed and the form that they were able to generate. And I think the trade-off or the concern, if you're a supporter of a team that kind of gets competitive, not good, but competitive pretty quickly, is that maybe you miss the chance to hang around in the part of the ladder where you get those premium draft picks. And actually, you're maybe sacrificing a couple of opportunities to pick from the best bits of the draft. But actually, what you're doing is you're instilling competitiveness, you're instilling resilience, and I think it served Adelaide pretty well. And so I think inevitably there is a trade-off here. And what we're into year 3 of the Richmond rebuild, probably year 4 of the West Coast rebuild, if we want to pivot a little bit. Or so it's a long road, and I don't know. I think there have been green shoots for both. I think that had West Coast had their kicking boots on, they'd have won on Sunday, and then I think we could be talking about, okay, this is a 5-win season off the back of a 1-win season last year. This is a team that's really actually beginning to go in the right direction. But then you have a game like that, and actually it just feels really frustrating.
It was, but the game they played in Perth was a much better game. That was a really fun game to watch. This wasn't. This was a slog to get through. And what you're saying there about senior leadership, I think Richmond have got that. I think Richmond's the guys who have hung around from the three-peat have been really good. Nankervis, Broad, who's retired today, and lots of others. And I think that maybe that's the one thing that West Coast lack is that same that depth of older players who have kind of, take him on for the team a bit. And I think there's a few more Richmond players of that ilk who are willing to take one and who are willing to do the slog. I'm not sure. A lot of the real sort of grunt work is being done by West Coast younger players. I'm not sure that their older players are sort of holding up their end of the bargain the way Richmond's older players are. Even though, having said that, I think that West Coast are probably a little bit more advanced in their rebuild. I just think they've kind of done it very different ways.
I will say that the Richmond players that have hung around, they're pretty well spread across the different line groups. And
Yep.
when you talk to clubs and you observe them, they'll split into their groups of 6 or 7 or whatever to talk. You've got Nankervis, Lynch, obviously, and other forwards. Rioli has been there and thereabouts. The young Willie. You've got the defensive group, of course, have had some stalwarts from that successful era. Bolter has played all around too. So you've got those voices of calm that can reassure you. And you think of Dersma with tears in his eyes. The person who
Yeah.
reassuring him immediately was Harley Reid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't anyone else.
And sometimes I'm not, this is my one chance of the year to go all Kane and old school and,
Hang on, I'll get the fire retardant gear here, and I'll and
but I thought it was really good to see. I just think it's good to see a young player who cares that much. And sometimes when I see a footballer after a game, you do want them to be hurting. You don't want. Sometimes you do see too many smiles and too many. And I know that this is such a trope and this is such a cliche, and I'm sort of running with the herd a bit here, but I just think that seeing a young guy put that much into it and be pretty raw and in a bit of a state after a loss like that is a really good indication of that they've got someone who wants to be there, someone who gives a shit, and
Yeah.
someone who probably made a couple of mistakes at the end. He's going to be some sort of footballer, and yeah, and like you say, the fact that it was Reed, who's a very different personality to him, that I don't know. I don't always see that leadership from some of those other West Coast players. Maybe they do it in a more unobtrusive, behind the scenes sort of
yeah,
way because everyone leads differently. But yeah, Richmond's leadership is more. I think it's more structural and it's more like they've shored up the fact that they've been able to shore up their defence with those older players. Vlosten's been a better player since he was in the premierships.
yeah.
And I think that that's meant that Richmond never get belted. Really, it's happened pretty rarely in their rebuild, and I think that's a lot to do with the leadership down back. Maybe a bit of leadership that the West Coast haven't had or
I,
Yeah.
I
lost.
Well,
will. I was going to just add one more thing. If there's one thing to be slightly critical for about the Richmond build versus the West Coast build, while the leadership is a bit more spread at Richmond, I think a lot of the draft talent they've got, the fit isn't as clear, and we talked about it with Layla about what he's going to be, but they've picked a lot of those big hulking mid-forward options, and I know on the
Yep.
Marnie episode, another great episode that you should go back and listen to, and hopefully we'll get Marnie back on the pod soon, but we talked briefly about short kings and short queens. Richmond's gone the other way. They've indexed size through their utility midfield roles. Whereas other clubs, you look at Nick Watson and his success. Keziah Pickett has now become essentially a full-time midfielder and had a lot of success. Naz Wangareen Miller is relatively slight for a primary on-ball player, as is Nick Dacos. A lot of the league has gone the other way, and Richmond have indexed size in those roles so heavily. Whereas West Coast have drafted talls who have had some success. They've drafted midfielders that have had some immediate success. They've picked some backs up that have had success. I don't think we've got that diversity for Richmond yet, and their fit together, if they all come off, is a bit more unclear in my view. I think Uze's system, as of last year, looked really good. I'm not sure how the talent all fits together just yet. Sorry, Mateo.
Yeah, what I was going to say, Cody, on that point is that I do think these two rebuilds kind of express slightly different philosophies. West Coast, they've drafted talls, and Richmond have as well, but they sort of started, it felt like more with the smaller ground level players. So, yeah, I don't know. And Jonathan, to what you said about that, maybe that missing leadership on the West Coast list, I think I wonder if we've seen some of the club's recent acquisitions, like Starcevic, like the fact that they've gone pretty deep in a couple of mid-season drafts and picked up maybe more like 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds, is maybe a bit of a recognition of the fact that demographically there was a slightly missing part of their list. They needed some more senior bodies on board. They obviously got Baker, they got Graham as well. Kind of, I guess the idea was acting almost as a bodyguard for Harley Reid. So I think there was a recognition that you can't just have talented kids out there every week because the results won't be pretty. But look, yeah, Sunday was not. It's safe to say, I think, a vintage game of footy. I think Jonathan attests to that. I think Jonathan's daughter probably attests to that. And I suspect that anyone who was banking on Jake Waterman to be kicking straight would probably attest to that as well. But yeah, it's obviously been a long time in the basement for supporters of both these clubs. But I guess if you're feeling very sad, Tigers and Eagles fans, you can just put on some grand final replays from that 2017 to 2020 period and feel a bit better about things.
Can I throw a quick question without notice? And two-word answer or three-word answer works. Who do you reckon's going to contend for finals next out of those two? And who do you think's actually going to be top four-ish based on what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years? Who do you think is closer to exiting the rebuild properly? Mateo?
West Coast for me. I think they're 2 years away from being a serious team.
John?
I think both are going to be really good. And I think that probably West Coast, if Reid hangs around, might get there first.
Yeah, right.
Cody?
I lean West Coast a little bit too. I think there's more questions with Richmond. I think there's a lot of... Both look all right, but I think West Coast are just... Was it a year further on, is what you said, Jonathan, before?
Yeah, possibly. I think Richmond have lost a year this year.
Yeah.
But I think that they'll recoup that, so to speak.
West Coast and Richmond fans hopefully got a little bit of nourishment out of that conversation. We're going to be right back with more 110 percenters.
You're listening to the 110 percenters.
Welcome back to 110 percenters, the footy podcast with Jonathan Horn, Cody Atkinson and me, Matteo Schlapek-Civillo. It's time for From the Hip, our rapid fire question segment.
Cody.
From the hip.
Oh, Jonathan, you're so eager to get started on this week's bumper edition of From the Hip. I hadn't quite finished the intro.
From the hip.
One host asks, two hosts answer. Jonathan, the first question is yours.
Thank you, my friend. Cody, what do you think of the memo that old mate Swanee recently sent to clubs, reminding them of their, and I quote, obligations to perform to one's merits?
Rule 29, isn't it? Look, it's my bedside reading. I have the AFL annual report, the AFL rules, the AFL old handbooks. It's the sort of thing you need to go to sleep at sort of 9 a.m. in the morning while archers are having a crack. I think somewhat it's a bit performative and they're sort of jumping at shadows a bit and they're trying to solve two problems with one memo. They're trying to solve for, it looks like instead of the hard battle for finals spots, as was anticipated with going to wildcard finals, it's actually a lot. There's not going to be a battle really for 7 to 10, it looks like at this stage, and it could be locked up a couple of weeks out. The memo is not for 1 to 6. They've still got the pre-finals bye effectively in the new format, so it's not really for them. So those who are saying Fremantle might do a Ross line and rest 15 guys in last week, I don't think that's a big threat. We saw Bevo get questioned on 360 and Stephen King get questioned. It's those guys because they've had injury issues all year. Their lists are going to have to win 5 games in a row to get through finals. I'm stealing all Mateo's gear here. This is great. I joke. And the other thing it's for is teams in 11 to 15th. Because if you finish in 4th or 5th last this year, you've got the prospect of an early second round pick for the first time due to the bid matching rules. And there's going to be 2 guys get picked up who are academy, father, son, etc. at the top end of the draft. Pick in the early 20s isn't worth nothing. It's pretty significant chip. There may be some funny stuff at the bottom end. I think he didn't want to put it in there, but I think Swanee may have had an eye for those teams, your Gold Coasts, your Norths, your GWSs, to make sure that they hit the finish line hard. It's also a reaction to the NBA bringing in their 65% player rule and the participation rule over there. Often they ape what's happening overseas. Anyway, I'm writing about that one this week, so I have a lot to say. Matteo.
I just think it's astonishingly rich of the AFL to, in effect, what they're doing, of course, is trying to deter clubs from distorting the competitive integrity of the competition. When the AFL have distorted the draft, they have reasonably capriciously changed rules in ways that I think have meaningfully impacted clubs' rebuilds and really systematically prioritised and deprioritised certain archetypes of players and certain types of playing. The rule changes are all, of course, systematically geared in one direction, which is to speed the game up, to make it quicker, to encourage the, I guess, athleticism and a certain kind of footy. So I think it's very rich for clubs and for Greg Swann to now be telling coaches that actually the league knows better than senior coaches when it comes to, I guess what's good for the competition. And it was. I did something unusual, which was I watched that specific episode of AFL 360 that Cody's alluding to with Bevo and Stephen King on it last night. I was really taken aback by the forthrightness and bluntness of Stephen King's comments, particularly given, of course, Stephen King famously usually takes hundreds, if not thousands, of pages to get to the point in some of his books. But he just said straight up, look, my interests are all about the Melbourne Football Club, and I'm going to do whatever's in the best interests of the Melbourne Football Club. And so he should have. And I'm really glad he said that. And I also think there's a really interesting meta point here about seemingly how liberated some coaches are feeling to almost publicly defy the AFL on some of this stuff, which I think marks a pretty significant change from even a few years ago. And I think it suggests that, and I'm not sure I would totally expect the AFL to really recognise this fact. There's a lot more disgruntlement and discontent among AFL clubs toward the league than I think is generally understood. And I think we saw a little bit of that poke its head above the parapet last night. So good on Stephen King. Good on Bevo. I'm sure he probably agreed, even if he didn't use quite as strong language.
Yeah, I agree. And look, you've got a first year coach willing to speak out. Usually first year coaches are sort of stay in your box kind of thing. And it was, just to sort of add to that when I think it was Jared Waitley on SEN last week, first questions Swan about this. And his answer was just really kind of, I guess, unsatisfactory. It was really wishy-washy. It was almost like he wasn't prepared for it. And it's like if you're running a competition, if you're in a role like that, you have to have seen this coming 3 months out, that you have to have anticipated this. And I guess so it's almost like he's been making policy on the hop again, which is something that they do. I mean, the other thing about this is we can't underestimate the role that bookmakers play in this and the role that the sports betting industry and how enthralled the AFL are to them in terms of, again, inverted commas, integrity of every game. They want sort of the cards on the table before every game so that they can put their betting markets up and then people can bet with confidence. And the AFL will quite happily go along with that. And I think that, there's a lot going on in Australia right now with bookmakers and Senate inquiries and things like that. We get a good insight into what we're dealing with them. And we shouldn't be sort of upending our competition and implementing these rules just because of that.
I will just add one more thing. I reckon clubs are a little bit more willing to speak out too, because during COVID era and even before then, there were more clubs that relied on the AFL for unequal distributions of finances, and I think there was a little bit more control exerted. And as the new broadcast deal has kicked in and the new financial reality for clubs has kicked in, more clubs are seeing that they're a bit freer to not have purse strings allegedly held a bit tighter by the AFL. And I think there's that extra bit of freedom has allowed a bit more frankness and a bit more public dissent versus the private dissent that I think happened beforehand, which is a really, really interesting change. And the other one is like a million TV shows needing content, AFL TV shows needing content.
And just to sort of wrap that up, also about what we were talking about last week in terms of Chris Scott and Ross Lyon and Beveridge, I would say, have been three senior coaches who are willing to complain and speak up. And a lot of other coaches, I think, are emboldened because of that. I think that represents a little bit of a shift from other eras of coaching. Is that those really, really senior coaches have been there a long, long time, and they none of them have any great love of bureaucracies and governing bodies and things like that, and they're willing to speak out against it.
So that I think we've come to a point there that the Ripper bloke that is Swanee may have met more opposition than he originally thought with his memo. I've got the next question for you, Matteo. Matteo, can Carlton not afford to appoint Josh Fraser as their next senior coach?
I think because we should remember that Josh Fraser was publicly very reluctant to take the praise and adulation of the adoring Carlton crowd until probably a couple of weeks ago, and then of course Saturday night happened, just that extraordinary balmy game, and I had a friend who was there and who was just texting me throughout the game and talking about how he'd never been to a Carlton game like that. That's how amazing it was, the highest score for 14 years and dismantling Brisbane the way they did, particularly with new players playing such a role. Jagger Smith was obviously so excellent, but new guys like Will Hayward was also really good. So some of those trades have worked really well for Carlton. So I think Josh Fraser has played absolutely perfectly. He's obviously a very good strategist in that sense. So I think the obvious analogy here, I suppose, and what I suspect a lot of people at Carlton have been thinking a lot about is their decision to give the job permanently to David Teague after a good interim period at the end of when he was caretaker coach, and how that, I guess, ultimately proved to be a mistake. But I think you can be a prisoner of history with this stuff. You can be a prisoner of the moment, yes, but you can be a prisoner of history as well. And I think ultimately, and I've tackled this subject in a couple of articles that I've written about coaching and the epistemology of decision making within clubs, which is a wanker way of saying that it's really hard to reason from these minuscule sample sizes. And so it's really hard to answer what are fundamental questions like, is Matthew Nicks a good coach, or will Josh Fraser be a good coach if we give him the job permanently? I think what's clear is that Josh Fraser has optimized short-term results. I think he seems to have stabilized the environment at that club, and obviously winning placates every stakeholder group, right? So in a way, maybe I'm saying the same thing. I think he's found a style tactically which has yielded really good results. A lot of performances being driven by younger and newer players at the club. Taylor Byrne, I should give a shout out to, because he's looked really, really good in his debut season. And I think also one of the most important questions about a club and a coach appointment is almost totally obscure to us as punters, and it's how good is the fit between that coach and their personality and the environment that they're operating in, because no two clubs are the same. But Carlton is so unique. This is such a gargantuan, historic, and yet also success-starved coach. Fraser, I think, is very cleverly sort of, just taking down the temperature. He plays everything with a super straight bat. He's not this kind of pump-up guy. He really just goes around in his hoodie and gets his team playing pretty solid footy. So I think it's been a really interesting, again, sample size now of about 3 months, a little bit over 3 months. So I've got quite a lot of data on Josh Fraser, and I think a lot of it is pointing in a really positive direction. And you've got to weigh that against, I guess, the really decorated CVs of some of the other names that we hear linked to the Carlton head coach job. But I think he's had an extended audition, and it's not clear to me that he could have performed better. So I think if Carlton appoint Josh Fraser now, and if in 5 years we're talking about how that was the wrong decision, well, I certainly don't think that would have been visible in hindsight. And obviously people like Graham Wright don't have the benefit of operating in hindsight. They can only make decisions based on the knowledge they have at the time. And I think Josh Fraser's done a brilliant job.
Jonathan?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, mate. I just think that a senior coach has to sometimes be an appointment has to be the counterbalance to the prevailing sort of emotion and mood of that club. And Carlton's a very emotional club. I mean, they've got presidents who are in scandals that you couldn't make up. They've got wealthy benefactors who are just unhinged in terms of what they do when Carlton's going badly. Other clubs don't have that. It is a totally engaged, very emotional supporter base that rides a roller coaster, and it just sometimes with a club like that, it helps to have just someone so even tempered, and like you say, just someone who can just calm things down. I think that's what Carlton need. And I also think it's what Longmuir provides at Fremantle at the moment is that counterbalance. And I also think it's what McRae provided at Collingwood, this sort of seen as this arrogant, loud, proud club, and they suddenly bring in this very sort of humble, almost nerdy man. It was exactly what they needed, that kind of counterbalance. I think Fraser provides that. And let's face it, 9 wins from 11 is a hell of a lot of a hell of a better job application than any PowerPoint presentation or psych test or anything
Yep.
like that. It's all there for all of us to see. This is so different to the Teague appointment. They can't be compared. I think if he wants the job, he has to get the job.
I,
Yep.
I, I'll just add, I don't think it's Carlton's decision to make here. I think all the power, all the decision making sits with Josh Fraser. He publicly hasn't thrown his hat in the ring yet. He's dealt with tragedy this week and continued to coach. It's quite clear that Fraser is weighing up both his short term and long term futures alongside his personal life. Often in coaching things, there has been a few decisions where is Alistair Clarkson going to come in? There's a few of them where the coach has dictated the decision. I think the unusual thing here is Fraser is not an experienced senior coach before this at AFL level. Of course, he's got runs on the board at VFL level with the Bull Ants. I think he's started to answer some of the questions that we've explored on this podcast about how they'd respond to a loss and how resilient they would be and how they would be willing to change their method. There's still a bit of Voss DNA kicking around quite clearly there. He hasn't had that off season. But yeah, this is Fraser's decision to make, not Carlton. So I'm not going to ding Carlton if they don't appoint him in the end, unless he later says that he was keen and opted out. It feels like here it's Fraser's decision to make sure that he's ready to take on this big load. And it is a huge increase in workload, albeit with a lot of extra money. And I'm not going to fault him at this point of his life and his career if he doesn't want to opt in yet. He's got the best resume for what he'll get to pick his next job, whatever that job is. If it's Carlton, it's Carlton. If it's another club, it's another club.
Very well said, Cody. Next question is mine, Jonathan. A few weeks ago, Nicky Winmar was removed from the Australian Football Hall of Fame. He's also suspended from the St Kilda Hall of Fame after he was convicted of assaulting a woman. A statue of Winmar outside Optus Stadium, in his famous defiant pose, will also be taken down. Are these the right decisions?
Oh boy, I feel like the tone of this podcast might shift a little bit here with that question, Matteo. That's a really tough thing to answer. I'll try and do it justice in the short amount of time that we've got. Look, I'm always wary all around the world when I hear of people wanting to tear down statues. In America, you see people tearing down statues of Robert E. Lee in the South, for example, which I think is incredibly ignorant of history. And I think in this instance, what sits uneasily was the haste in which that statue was taken down and the fact that it was a political decision as well. On the flip side of that, we talk in this country about a national crisis in terms of violence against women, and we talk about it, and we talk a pretty good game in footy as well with that issue. We like to think we're doing the right things when it comes to that issue, but it's almost like we call it a national crisis until it's not. And every time I read a newspaper these days, I read about a woman being killed by a partner or by often a former partner. And I think that honestly, a champion footballer who's convicted of beating up a woman, I think we're right that we mention that in the same breath. And so, for what it's worth, I think it's the correct decision to remove him from the Hall of Fame. I think that we could then go down the rabbit hole of Carey and Ablett and the
Yeah.
whataboutism and all that. But I think in this instance, I think it had to be done. The statue is infinitely more complex because that is a thing that goes beyond Nicky Winmar. That is something that means a lot to Aboriginal people. And I understand the wider angst that that's caused to Aboriginal people tearing that statue down. But I think in this instance, if we're actually serious about this issue, we have to make really hard, tough decisions. And I think the right decision's been made in both instances.
I think there's a couple of competing things here for me that are a bit interesting. I think St Kilda probably made the right call to suspend his membership of the Hall of Fame in the short term while the appeals process is playing out. And I think removing the only two men to be removed from the AFL Hall of Fame, Barry Cable and Nicky Winmar. There's other men in the Hall of Fame. Cable is alleged and has been found civilly liable for some horrendous acts, but he was found not guilty at a criminal trial. There are other men who have been convicted and sent to jail in the Hall of Fame, and their membership hasn't been reviewed. The criteria for the removal of membership is very vague and unclear. I think historically statues and stadiums and places weren't named after the living. In a lot of the world, it's a posthumous thing, and I think that's because someone's reputation is only completed once they have unfortunately passed away. And I think there's a haste to anoint people while they're still alive now. And we've seen it with a lot of uproar about Margaret Court and Margaret Court Arena. There's stadiums named after dictators overseas now that have later get renamed. I think we now race to write and finalise history before the last sentence has been uttered and stated. And I think that's the bigger issue symbolically here for me with the statue is, was that the right time for that particular statue to be built anyway? And I know that's going to run counter to a lot of people. I think to recognise the plight and the struggles of Indigenous people and the racism that they've felt, there's so many significant and important moments through history that have been lost and not publicly recognised. I think they would have been a better place to start anyway. And I know that's going to run counter to a lot of our listeners. I think the AFL Hall of Fame erred with removing merely one person or not instituting a process for the review of all the members of the Hall of Fame, particularly who are vulnerable here, and setting clear criteria. That's something the NRL has done with their stand down rule. I think there needs to be a better view of that going forward, of what the criteria are to be removed from the Hall of Fame. I in no way condone Nicky Winmar's actions and his convictions. I think it's terrible actions from reading the limited excerpts of the court case. No way endorse what he did. But I think there needs to be a systematic view and a clear view of what is bad behaviour and what crosses the line and what doesn't. Because right now, what it looks like is that the only two men that have been punished with this type of thing are Indigenous men, and that's a pretty poor look.
Yep.
It's
Oh, I mean, I certainly don't have anything as articulate as what the two of you guys said to contribute to this. I think that the gesture and the defiance and the struggle depicted in that, iconic photo and gesture and statue of Nicky Winmar will live forever. We've obviously learnt a lot more about the vessel and the character, perhaps, about the man who made that gesture, and does that warrant tearing down a statue? This is probably a cop-out. I'm not really sure it's for me to say. I suppose it's not clear to me that I'm really quite the right person to speak about it. I think that we should have to clear a pretty high bar to do things like tear down statues, and I think it's reasonable if you believe that this has met that threshold. But I just want to endorse in the strongest terms what Cody said, that I think this is actually a missed opportunity for the AFL to think really deeply about the character considerations of people who are in the Australian Football Hall of Fame. This isn't obviously, the Hall of Fame goes beyond just the AFL, but the AFL is today the custodian of the game and the memory of the game and the legacy of the game. And if that's to mean anything, I think it is about upholding a behavioural and a character standard of who gets to be in the Hall of Fame, and about the AFL being really explicit in saying that being a good person matters as much as being a good footballer. That was a little bit of a pivot, wasn't it? The next question, I think, is yours, Jonathan.
On a slightly brighter note, gentlemen, Cody, what did you make of the Australia-Ireland international rules game on the weekend?
I thought it was a fantastic celebration of the women's game, first and foremost. And I think some of the footy was absolutely electric. I think, despite that, there were clear concerns and issues. Actually, one of the 110 percenters reporter, Sean Lawson, went down to the game and asked questions of the coaches. I'm sure he's going to be glad to be called that. If I can get the edit right now, you'll be cutting to some of those responses from the coaches. If not, you'll just hear my voice continuing to talk.
Just on the run and carry, this is a very small ground. Would you have preferred to play this on a bigger field, have a bit more room to run and carry and spread it?
Yeah, well, probably. It goes without saying the way we want to play as an Irish team was, if we bigger ground is better, we could have it twice the size of here. It'd be amazing. But that takes nothing away from North Sydney. What an incredible oval and what an incredible experience tonight for, I think it was over 9,000 people came in, sellout crowd. Like, that is next level. And what, as Orla mentioned, what this is going to do for female sport and AFLW as a whole, this can be a real springboard. Like, I think that shouldn't get lost in what everyone's saying tonight.
A big part of rep footy is you've got to put a team together with limited prep really short time. Can you just tell us a bit about the challenges of putting together a team and a game plan?
Yeah, 4 months we worked on the game plan, and we had 6 sessions. It was awesome. We had 48 hours to come together, and it was all about connection and trying to connect. Like I said, we want to play a running type of game. Didn't work all the time, but when it did, it looked pretty cool. So it was.
And I think on that, if anything, the connection piece was the easiest. It was like it was a reunion for us. It was hard to stop us chatting throughout the whole weekend. So that came as natural, and you could see really Gaelic football instincts there, which I think is a huge part of it.
I think they didn't pick the right ground. It's quite clear North Sydney Oval is not fit for that purpose. It's a beautiful, beautiful historic ground. It's just not the right ground for that purpose. As you may have heard, Ireland's coach said it probably hurt their chances of being competitive in victory because of their run and carry style of game. Would have worked better on the SCG or any sort of football ground that's a proper football ground and not a scale model of a football ground. I think limiting the fans and I think the AFL should have made it free, open access for all. They shouldn't have sold tickets for the first one. They should have opened the gates of the SCG, copped the loss, and had it as a real spectacle for the history and advancement of the game. But they're nearly, the smallest points there. I think it was great to see. There was so many passages of play that made me so happy. It was so fantastic to see the passion that the fans and the players had for it and the celebrations after the game. Some questions about who picked the techno remix of, was it Down Under, as the Australian national theme song? But again, that's a bit of a small quibble.
Matteo.
Yeah, I loved it. It was electrifying. I think it probably vindicated the people who said that this is the way the game would go, and that the smaller dimensions of the oval would really benefit the contest and stoppage superiority of the Australian side, and that was borne out, and just their complete dominance in the ruck, and Talia Randall was maybe the most dominant player. I loved some of what Ireland could do on transition. I mean, that forward handball, running almost sort of flying V, very GAA movement was really outstanding. I think it was Neve McLaughlin's goal. That goal that she kicked off the ground in the goal square that she sort of chipped over. That was amazing. It's one of my favourite goals of the whole season.
Spectacular.
Really spectacular, just really skilled, great exhibition. It felt, and I mean this in a wholly complimentary sense, it felt kind of like a Harlem Globetrotters game, and I think a really good way to whet people's appetite for the upcoming W season. Of course, the season is starting on Sunday, and so that'll be great to see. But it was a great exhibition for the women's game, and I think a timely reminder of just how exciting it is.
Jonathan, did you catch any of it?
I did. I just echo what you guys said. Like you said, they did have a very GAA feel, the way they move the ball, the sort of propulsive, they're quick, those Irish girls. And Niamh McLaughlin, that's a good Irish name too. I like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
it's great, and it's great to see women's footy at that elite level. You just see what we're going to be looking at in 5-10 years time is something pretty special.
Next question is mine. I'm going to ask with a slight hint of concern that we might not be able to contain ourselves and we might run over our time allocation here. But Jonathan, this question is from friend of the pod, Jack Turner. You get 3 guys to build a new team around, sort of for the next 5-10 years. Which 3 are you picking?
3, Jack. Rightio. No pressure. I am picking 3. How long am I building this team for?
Well, this is the sort of
Forever.
footy redraft
Forever?
game
Okay.
question,
Forever?
isn't it?
I am taking Reed because I love him. I'm taking Dersma because what I said before about how much it means, just what a fantastic player he's going to be. And I'm going to take that little short man from Hawthorn, Nick Watson, because you can build a team around him for a long time, I think.
I'll let you go next, Matteo.
I'm going to wear my Crows hat for one of these, and I'm going to say Riley Thilthorpe. He's been below his 2025 form for most of the season, but I just think, and obviously, look, answers like Cameron and Tracy are more than acceptable, but I think you're going to want to pick a key forward who can sort of anchor the entire side, and I just think that Thilthorpe at his best, particularly when he's chopping out in the ruck and actually being really effective on ball, is still half a rung above maybe the other sort of key forwards of his generation. But perhaps there's a little bit of bias there. I think Watson's a really hard one to go past. I just think, I mean, he's already, I think, outperforming probably all but the most optimistic forecasts of what kind of player he would be. He's just absolutely electrifying. So smart, so clever. I think, yeah, I mean, I think he should spend more time on ball because I think the stuff that he does on ball, I'm always really, really impressed by as well. And then I think it's about picking a midfielder, and I think it's sort of that question: do you want that impact burst dynamism guy, and then maybe it is someone like a Sam Lawler or perhaps a Harley Reid, but if it's someone who you want to sort of eat those minutes and be there for every bounce and just give you good output. I don't know, someone like Jagger Smith might be a pick. Zach Butters probably also. I just think he can kind of do everything as such an inspiring player. So, yeah, maybe I'll say, what have I said? Thilthorpe, Watson, and let's go Butters.
This is the hardest question, Jack, and
It's
podcast. Jack's
devilish.
podcast, the Back Pocket, was a great podcast. I'll just give it a quick shout out. And he also writes for This Week in Football. We'll give that a shout out.
You should name a defender then, Cody, because neither Jonathan nor I did.
Well, that was the segue, and it's really hard to pick a defender. I'll pick someone who often gets called a defender as my first port of call. No one's mentioned Naz. I think Naz is 23 years old, peak of powers type stuff. I think maybe not the truest of true defenders, but still good nonetheless. I think then it gets down to what you're looking for. A lot of people out west would pick Ruben Ginbey. I think a lot of people in Melbourne would pick Charlie Comben. I actually like your Adelaide boy, Worrell, 25 years old. I think Sam Taylor too. I don't think he's too old from this type of conversation as well. And then up forward, I mean, Tracy or Thilthorpe are pretty good shouts. I'd actually still think Cozzy Pickett instead of Nick Watson, just to give a bit of variety of names. But it's great.
Thank you very much for that question, Jack. It's always great remembering some guys, but this time we're actually remembering guys who are still in the league, so that's a little bit of a change of pace from us. I reckon we've got time for one more. It really has been a bumper edition of From the Hip, and I'm going to ask it, and I'm going to ask Cody. We're going to end on a little bit of a note of levity, but obviously it's a question available to all hosts. It does come from listener and Shimbona. Ricky Mangidis, do read the Shimbona if you're not already. If a friend, says Ricky, definitely not referring to himself, has only been able to watch one full round over the last couple of months, what are some of the most fun, under-the-radar storylines to lock back in on leading up to finals?
Can Freo go undefeated? Can Gold Coast win a game? Can Cody still feel jealous that Ricky saw multiple NBA Finals games where the Spurs played even though the Spurs lost? They're the ones I would lock into, Jonathan.
Yeah, mine was like when Gold Coast started the season. Well, should we start changing all the rules so Gold Coast don't win the next 5 premierships and completely take the piss out of everyone? So do we completely upend the competition just to sort of thwart all the benefits they've been given in the last few years? Yeah, Mateo.
Yeah, hasn't that take aged well? I made a very similar prediction during their opening round game, I believe it was, which I've since acknowledged is not my best take. I actually think that one of the most fun, well, no longer under the radar storylines, because it was reported today, was the one that broke today about Jake Stringer. I guess I need to be careful with my words here. Jake Stringer attempting to encourage some of his teammates and perhaps even coaches at GWS to invest in his business, and that apparently may have created a little bit of an erosion of trust and maybe behind the suggestions or the whispers perhaps that Jake Stringer won't be a Giants player next season. I think I described the story like this to a friend of mine who also found it quite amusing. That had you told me the contents of that story, but with none of the player names or club names attached to it, I think Jake Stringer would maybe have been my top guess. It's a great story, so I don't know if you're across that one, Ricky.
What was he selling? Was it fish oil or something?
Yeah,
or
something.
protein,
It was
some protein
supplements business.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
What
I
could
feel
go
like we
wrong?
didn't use the word allegedly or redacted enough there, but like it's all good. My choice for the most likely players there are, of course, redacted, and deleted. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that, Cody. But I think also I'm surprised that it wasn't redacted.
Yeah, I agree.
Ricky, hopefully that's brought you up to speed a little bit. Do you have any more, Cody?
I was going to say, I think we're nearly at the end of our time, but that's not my job here. That's your job, Mateo.
It is. No, I mean, but by all means, if you want to do the sign off, you should. You know, it's always good for people to get practice with these sorts of things, especially because we should say, listeners, next couple of weeks you'll be hearing some different voices on the microphone. Jonathan, you're not here next week.
I'm not. I'm leaving this beautiful climate in Melbourne for the torrid weather of Bali at this time of year.
Yeah, look,
with a 3-year-old.
I'm sorry that you have to do that. I mean, we all have to make sacrifices, and you have to go to Bali in the middle of winter. Like, that's a tough one for the rest of us, man.
It's trench warfare with a 3-year-old. We're coming in all guns blazing. We've got strategies. We've got it all mapped out. What could go wrong?
It had to be pretty good to get you away from the 110%ers pod, so we'll allow it. And I will not be here in 2 weeks, listeners, because I will also be in Bali. Yes, basically be taking notes from Jonathan and going to doing all the things that he recommends and not doing any of the things that he doesn't. In the meantime, I think we're all working on things. I'm still working on my AFLW feature with Gemma Bastiani that should land in your inboxes if you subscribe to 1%ers later this week. Cody, I know you're working on something.
Yeah, I've got a piece on exactly what we talked about before, the memo, and how it's going to affect behaviour at both ends. And I've been doing a lot of digging into numbers. I never thought I'd be here. I don't know if the article's interesting, but you're going to see it, and it's going to have some new information, I hope, for all our listeners.
And Jonathan?
I'm delving into the topic of, is Max Gawn the greatest ruckman in the history of the sport? So there's going to be a lot of people from a lot of eras who's probably not going to like what I say, particularly. But it's a tough one. I haven't even landed on an answer to that question yet, and it's due in about 12 hours. So we'll see how we go with that.
The more controversial, the better. We're sure you would do that subject. We're sure you'll do that subject justice. That's all from us this week. My thanks to Jonathan, Cody, and our hearty thanks to you, listener. If you like what you're hearing, please review our show wherever you listen to it. It does make us easy to find, and even if you're not loving it so much, we want to hear your thoughts as well, just so long as they're constructive. You can write to me at hello@1percenters.net.au, and you can now find us on Twitter and Instagram. The handle is 110%ers. Until next week, I've been Mateo.
I've been Jonathan.
And I've been Cody.
And we're the 110 Percenters.